Welcome, Avi. Dr. Avi Cordova is an associate professor of global affairs at the University of Notre Dame. Cordova's research examines the consequence of inequality and marginalization for democracy, integrating topics related to violence against women, organized crime, militarization, and international migration in the context of Central America, Mexico, and Brazil. She was awarded the Harry Frank Guggenheim Distinguished Scholar Award in 2022, and we are so excited to have her today with us.
Should I go ahead? Yes, okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this great opportunity to be here with all of you and taking the time on this day that at least here, as usually, is very cold and, so it's difficult, but online talks help a little bit with that. So maybe you are at home, I can see that. But anyway, I really want to thank particularly Professor Karim and also everyone who made just possible for me to be here today and share my work, and Priyanka and Mavis also for being in touch all the time and just make possible for us all to be here. So today, I would like to share some work in progress that I have going on, and some of you might have heard parts of my argument related to this book project, and I keep adding things and tweaking a little bit, not only the argument but also the evidence. So the work, as also it was mentioned, I mean, it is sponsored by the Guggenheim Foundation, and this is a book project also sponsored by the Kellogg Institute here at Notre Dame. And I would like to start describing the larger context of this project. And so, as you know, across the world, what we are seeing right across the world is that thousands of territories are dominated by organized criminal organizations, and that in these territories, we also see a greater incidence of police and military crackdowns or simply presence. And so the main goal here is to really try to understand how living in environments like this affect women's life in general, but also their propensity to experience different forms of violence. Just to give you a sense of how prevalent is, I mean, for those populations, or how they actually experience the militarization that we are seeing across the world. Just like last night, I found actually data from Latin America that reflects on, or at least show us how, I mean, in light of all these policies, the so-called iron fist policies in Latin America that have resulted in the greater militarization of the police, and also in the use of the military for public security operations in Latin America in particular, is reflected in survey data, right? So in the World Values Survey, the most recent one, there is this question that asks, to what extent the police or the military actually interfere with people's life in your neighborhood? And the people actually answering very frequently, or quite frequently, at least for some of the countries for which data has been collected, I mean, it's quite high. I mean, with Mexico, for example, having most respondents, I mean, like 23.7% of respondents saying, yes, the police and the military interfere in private matters of people in the neighborhood. So you can see that this is a very pervasive issue in the Latin American region and in several countries. I here just gather a couple of examples. And so in the case that I'm analyzing, which is my home country, El Salvador, we are seeing actually currently a manifestation of that intersection between military operations, precisely, I mean, in those territories that have been controlled by organized criminal groups, and specifically by gangs. And the current policy is actually to militarize those places and try to basically dismantle the local cliques or gangs that operate in given neighborhoods. And so again, so what are the implications of these dynamics for women when organized criminal groups' actions and their territorial control intersects with the militarization of the police and the use of the military for operations that, at least on paper or the public discourse, I mean, just points that the main objective is to dismantle organized criminal groups, even though, of course, we know that there is a lot of collusion between state armed forces and organized criminal groups. And so the specific research question that I address, or that I'm going to address in this talk, is how does organized criminal groups' territorial control increase women's residents' vulnerability to gender-based violence in context of militarized public security? So my book project has, different layers. And of course, here I'm focusing more on effects for women, and particularly gender-based violence. And in other parts of the book, I'm also trying to address the question of, okay, so yes, women are victimized, but we can just not see them just as victims, right? There are definitely coping mechanisms and forms of resistance that women also implement as to just live in these territories. I just want to make that clear, because that's important for me, that I don't want to simply say women are victims, but at least with this research question, I'm just exploring the ways that they experience gender-based violence. And so what is the motivation for my book project, and to address in this question in particular? In general, what we are seeing, right, and from previous literature, is that the issue of criminal violence, militarization, and violence against women are treated typically as three separate topics. And of course, there are current literature that try to connect them, mostly ethnographic work. And so what I'm studying here are some of these links that, for the most part, have been overlooked. So I want to understand how criminal violence affects violence against women, and also how the militarization that occurs, particularly in controlled territories by gangs in the context of El Salvador, affect women's life and the incidence of gender-based violence. And I would say that, violence against women, but in particular, intimate partner violence, have been perceived as a private matter and completely unrelated to criminal and state violence. And I really want to, in particular, point to this form of violence, gender-based violence, which is intimate partner violence. So in addition of just looking at what happens to women in the streets of these neighborhoods, I'm particularly focused on the forms of violence that are perceived often as private matters and completely unrelated to criminal and state violence, namely intimate partner violence. And so I'm drawing from a very large body of literature here, and the connections, particularly with violence and intersection with gender. My ideas here are really are building on previous work on gender, war, and peace. And obviously I could cite many more here and show you, but I just wanted to tell you that, given the absence of violence against women as a central focus of a study, in the area of criminal violence and governance, I'm drawing a lot, right, from previous work that study these topics mostly in the context of conflicts. Okay, and it happened again. It's not letting me move. Okay. Sorry, it seems that I will have to be doing that. So here is an overview of my argument. And so I theorize that organized criminal groups' territorial control increases women's daily risk of gender-based violence in the streets of neighborhoods and in the privacy of homes. Oh, goodness. Let me see, why is this not? Okay. And the second part of it is that this risk is actually perpetuated by this diminished reporting rates, largely due to the widespread distrust in the police that is, in part, I mean, the outcome of police abuse in these territories, including sexual violence against women by state armed actors. I mean, not only the police, but also the military. And so first, I mean, we need to have an understanding, at least for the sake of this talk, about, what do I mean by territorial control? And this is certainly a very contested term. And here I describe or define territorial control as a strong presence of an organized criminal group in a given geographic area whose members reside and operate in that territory. And so in those territories, residents' compliance, I argue, is achieved through what, Calivas calls selective violence. And in particular, organized criminal groups turn to the use of selective violence to deter residents in general, right, from disobeying the rules of organized criminal groups. And so for me, this use of selective violence to deter non-compliance is key, because I'm proposing that violence against women is a form of selective violence that is used strategically by organized criminal groups, but also by state armed groups. And in addition, I'm pointing to a very specific form of violence against women and its strategic use, which is sexual violence. So in this diagram, I summarize the argument, and I will try to go through the different links. But in general, what I posit is that this strategic use of sexual violence leads to this really impunity, widespread impunity, that also increases the chances of intimate partner violence perpetrated by civilians, right? Not only, this intimate partner violence will be linked to the actions of armed groups, but also, by those that are not necessarily related to an armed group. So I will explain this in more detail next. And so, but let's also think about what are some of the alternative arguments that, we could come up with. And so one important argument in the conflict literature is this idea that violence breeds more violence. And actually, basically saying the mechanism that I'm proposing is different. And this idea of violence breeds more violence establishes that higher exposure to armed violence makes residents more tolerant of all forms of violence, including intimate partner violence. So it's more like a cultural argument when you live in, context of high levels of violence. I mean, this kind of generates some sort of socialization effect. that leads to other forms of violence. And also there is another argument and that establishes that gender norms are more permissive of violence against women, and the resulting higher levels of intimate partner violence actually translate into a culture of more accepting of all types of violence, which can actually lead to a higher probability of armed violence. So here the argument is flipped. So we could think about intimate partner violence and violence against women as a widespread phenomenon that if you grew up in one of those households or in those contexts, actually it leads to a higher probability of someone engaging in activities, right, that can be illicit, leading to armed violence in general. And so, my argument actually contrasts with this cultural view. My emphasis is actually in the strategic use of violence against women by armed actors, and the impunity that creates in those territories that actually not only facilitates violence against women, and particularly sexual violence experienced in neighborhoods, but also leads to this more typically considered private form of violence, namely intimate partner violence. So here, right, like for the first part of my argument, what I'm saying is that in these territories controlled by organized criminal groups, both these groups and also state armed groups have an incentive to turn to the strategic use of sexual violence, particularly against women. And why is that? We have a body of literature showing that really sexual violence, and because of the patriarchal norms in society, assert manhood, right, and toughness, and actually dissociates men from femininity, making them look tough, right, and strong armed men. And so I argue that public displays of sexual violence can broadcast the organization's dangerous masculinity, which in turn can be instrumental for spreading fear and deterring non-compliance. And so is sexual violence against women is a selective form of violence that is used strategically. And so that has important implications in terms of in what ways the use of sexual violence can be strategic for the different types of armed groups. And for organized criminal groups, this strategic use of sexual violence, on one hand, it allows them to maintain territorial control, but also, I argue, it gives access to a key resource for their economies, which is women's labor. And what I see also from the evidence that I have gathered is that organized criminal groups tend to really recruit women for certain tasks. For example, in the case of Central America and El Salvador specifically, to charge extortion money, for example. And so organized criminal groups are likely to perceive actually female labor as having an important comparative advantage, particularly for committing nonviolent crimes. So research actually in social psychology has shown that, women are typically seen as or perceived as, being less likely to perpetrate crime. And so, using women for certain tasks could be beneficial not to get caught and, accomplish the goal. And actually, currently, I'm also testing these mechanisms, also using public opinion data. But this is, the argument so far. And so what about actually like state armed groups incentives, right, to turn to the use of sexual violence. And so here, again, drawing from literature, the conflict literature, what I argue is that sexual violence against women is used as a form of punishment to the larger community for, sympathizing with or supporting the enemy. In the case that I'm looking at is gangs in El Salvador, and also, right, as a way to retaliate against the enemy, meaning gangs or other organized criminal group, by taking over their assets. And assets meaning here really the girls and women that live in those territories. And so the argument really resembles this idea that, in these control areas, women are treated as lootable resources by state armed groups. And so what is the purpose of all of this? I mean, it's certainly a demonstration of power and effectiveness in carrying out these operations, right? If you look tough when you go to one of these neighborhoods, and you infuse fear to the larger population, that's actually, it can have like a political payoff, certainly, to engage in violent acts, but also in targeting women in particular. So, I mean, all these dynamics, I argue, that will lead to this widespread impunity in this context. Obviously, we know that in many countries, and Latin America specifically, I mean, reporting rates of any type of violent experience or experience with violence, I mean, it's not reported. However, this is particularly prevalent when we examine sexual violence. And these dynamics certainly are not contributing to increase reporting rates, not only because you don't report to the police or, a state authority because you fear retaliation from organized criminal groups, but also because you have experienced or you have seen state armed groups, including the police, also engaging in some of the same violent acts and sexual violence in particular. And so this sense of impunity leads to this other outcome, which is an increased probability of experiencing intimate partner violence in these environments, because knowing that, basically there is no rule of law, perpetrators of intimate partner violence might feel that they have a greater chance to engage in this form of violence without being caught. So I have a set of hypotheses that I'm not going to read, but basically, I mean, I just want to point out in general to some of the most important points. My argument suggests that what we are going to see in these controlled territories is particularly a higher incidence of sexual violence, because it's going to be this type of violence against women that is going to be the most effective to exert masculinity and infuse fear to the larger population in comparison to other types of gender-based aggressions. Of course, they intersect, but, the focus here is on sexual violence as being more prevalent. In the other hypothesis is that we should see a higher incidence of sexual violence in public spaces, again, to broadcast this masculinity, toughness, military character, in comparison to what we will find in territories that are or have less influence by criminal groups. And also, I mean, I draw another hypothesis that is because of the widespread impunity, like the incidence of sexual violence that women report, I expect them also that women will perceive them as, serious or very serious events. And so I expect to observe like greater severity of sexual violence in controlled territories. and similarly greater incidence of intimate partner violence, and greater severity of that form of violence. So the case study is El Salvador. So as probably most of you know, El Salvador, since the signature of a peace accord after a civil war, started to actually see basically the great incidence of organized criminal groups that started to actually became stronger and stronger and control a large proportion of the national territory. And also, as we know from previous work, this country actually has engaged in Iron Fist policies throughout this period, leading to a high level of militarization of public security. As I said, currently, this is the one policy, and that actually is involving like the crackdown of these neighborhoods that, have been stigmatized as being controlled by gangs. And we are seeing all these dynamics of actually military and police interference in these neighborhoods to the greatest proportions ever, I would say. And so the methods that I use is a large and sub-municipal study of violence against women across territories with varying degrees of organized criminal groups, territorial control, and also qualitative information from in-depth interviews that I have conducted with different actors, including violence against women service providers and organizations on the ground, working or actually advocating for human rights in the country. So the really tough thing right here for conducting any type of a study that examines territorial control is how you measure it. And so previous work actually has relied on key informants on the ground as a reliable sources of information, including neighborhood residents. And in the case here, I also look at school principals as key informants on what is going on in the territory, in this case where their schools are located. And so what I use really is an indicator of these reports by school principals that tell me whether a given school is located in an area controlled or not by gangs, and why schools. So actually schools, have been, kind of spaces for recruitment. They are an asset for organized criminal groups, and particularly gangs. Drug trafficking also occurs there. Extortion, and sometimes they have also worked as shelters for gangs. So securing a territory with a school nearby or a school in that territory is really key. That's my argument, and actually I have empirical evidence that support that claim. And so I use the 2017 National Census of Schools in El Salvador. There is also a 2018 census. And so, I'm in the process to also check whether that makes a difference. But the question that the census asks school principals is whether the school is located in an area dominated by gangs. And what I find, in that year is that principals reported basically or led to this statistic that over 21% of schools are in a gang control area. And so what I did is to georeference those areas and try to estimate estimated distances in meters from the centroid of a given census tract, where a survey respondent actually lives, to the nearest school in a gang-dominated zone. So please let me know if we are running out of time, and so I can just, cut a little bit of some other materials I have later during my presentation. So here you can see that the red dots are actually schools in GAN dominated census tracts according to the reports of the school principal. So this, has been widespread in the country. We don't know how the situation looks now in light of, again, the new policies of the current government, including a state of exception or emergency that has been going on since last year, and that has really targeted a lot of these areas. So the data that I use comes from many different sources, and I will say I just want to point to two of them, which is the survey data that I use to measure the incidence of violence against women, and this is, a 2017 national survey. I also found this 2016 survey that actually is samples mainly youth, but it's a very large sample, and so I'm able to georeference those surveys because they have the actual ID of the census tracts in them, and so I can just combine those survey data with the census information, not only from the census of schools, but also the national census. And so based on that, what I find is that over 50% of women sampled in the national survey on violence against women lives less than 1 kilometer from an area dominated by gangs. So this is, in 2017. So you can see the incidence of gun control in the country at that time. Okay, it's happening again. Let me see, it doesn't let me move. Okay, so how did I go about computing all these indicators based on this survey on violence against women? So I'm interested in looking at different forms of violence against women in the neighborhood. And so I examine psychological violence, physical violence, and sexual. Again, obviously, these different forms of violence, are not separate, right? But I'm, for the sake of testing this one hypothesis, looking specifically, at the 3 types of violence, but examining sexual violence in particular. And then I have an indicator of the incidence of intimate partner violence that just adds all the different types of intimate partner violence that a woman has suffered and that reported. So I do find evidence for, my first hypothesis, examining how territorial control in particular is going to affect or increase the likelihood of sexual violence. And I'm not going to show you all the tables, but just mainly show you some of the results here. And so what I find is that women who live in gun control areas are 9% more likely to experience sexual violence in their neighborhood. Okay, now I think I found a trick to make it work. Okay, so the probability of perceiving a sexually violent experience in the neighborhood by the women interviewing this national survey, and that they characterize this sexual violent act that they suffer as serious or very serious, is 19 points higher in gun control areas. As you can see in this graph, on the axis basically shows the distance from a known gun control area as determined by the school principal's reports, okay? And so, okay, but what about the identity of the perpetrators? And so this is how this other survey helps me just to examine who have been perpetrating these different forms of violence, and particularly sexual violence. And so here, I use an indicator or a proxy indicator in this survey that simply asks people whether youth in their neighborhood join gangs. And I use that, you know, as a proxy of territorial control. Obviously, it's not the best, but actually, when I examine its correlation with other indicators of, you know, signs of territorial control, it correlates really well. So I just use this. And so I examine how reports of particularly sexual harassment look like in areas dominated by gangs, according to people's reports in the situation in their neighborhood. So what I find is that when we look at sexual harassment by gangs, women and show like a 9% probability of saying that they did experience sexual harassment, but that's particularly when they do live in an area dominated by a gang. We can note too that men, 3% of them did report also sexual harassment by gangs. But also, I mean, and the numbers here are not very different. In gang-dominated areas, not only, is the sexual harassment higher perpetrated by gangs, but also what we see is that the police and the military, according to people's reports, also engage in sexual harassment in those territories dominated by gangs. And so this leads me to explore the last aspect or outcome that I'm examining, which is effects on intimate partner violence. And so what I find here is that, unfortunately, here too, right, women who live in gun control areas are 9.2% more likely to experience intimate partner violence. And this is using the survey on, National Survey on Violence Against Women, and using the indicator of distance to a known area controlled by gangs based on the reports by school principals. And so, unfortunately, again, similar story, and the probability of actually perceiving an intimate partner violence experience as serious or very serious by the women interview is 9.3% higher in gun control areas. But you can see anyway that in general, right, intimate partner violence is extremely widespread. Like if we go back to the previous graph, I mean, even in those areas farther away, I mean, it's over 40% of women saying yes, they have experienced intimate partner violence, but that's more prevalent and more serious in gun-dominated zones. So of course, here there are a lot of issues, right, that we can think methodologically to really find these results credible. And I run a bunch of robustness tests, and I'm not sure if I have time to go through all of that. But basically, I start with doing like a placebo test. I am actually measuring distance to schools in areas not controlled by gangs, because the actual characteristics of any area where you have a school, might be very different. And actually, I don't find, that results when I do that, just giving me confidence that what I'm capturing in the previous analysis is actually showing that the violence in those areas is related to gun dominance. And then I do like a matching strategy applied to multi-level modeling, just to pair census tracts that are similar on many characteristics, so I can have more control of confounding factors. And obviously the sample size really gets smaller, but I do find similar trends to the ones that I just show you. In addition, right, with the survey that just uses the indicator of gun control reported by citizens in the neighborhoods. One potential issue is that what I'm calling gun control, and particularly measured by whether youth join guns, might just reflect a larger issue, which is neighborhood violence. Like a gun-dominated zone, it doesn't necessarily mean that there are more like homicides, for example, or that there are more shootings, right? We just saw that there is more violence against women, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, there is going to be other forms of violence there. And so to just try to disentangle, again, these are imperfect tests, just quasi-experimental. If it's really more like the gun dominance or just general patterns of violence in the neighborhood, I use other techniques to explore that. And I do find that controlling by neighborhood violence in general, other forms, is still the gun dominance variable is strongly correlated with, sexual harassment against women in the police or the military or by guns. So here, right, what about the cultural argument too? One of the surveys allows me to examine residents' attitudes toward violence against women. And I don't find evidence that, at least in terms of the attitudes, that either men or women are more tolerant of violence against women in territories controlled by guns. And further, homicides, in those areas, that are controlled by guns, actually just homicides as such don't relate to violence against women, and sexual violence or intimate partner violence in particular, kind of, saying that it's not just that violence across the board, correlates with other forms of violence, as the violence breeds more violence argument suggests, right? And so I have qualitative evidence, and, I do find, a lot of evidence and testimonies that support some of my claims on this strategic use of sexual violence. And I'm not going to go through all the results. But, as I mentioned, this idea of using women's labor in these territories or targeting women in this way, it has been very prevalent, not only in El Salvador, but other Central American countries, in Honduras and Guatemala. And this has been also documented in other studies, and particularly using girls and women to charge extortion. And so in terms of more like the reactions of the public or residents in those neighborhoods, and this is what I'm working on now in creating a lot of survey experiments, is that respondents in my qualitative work really just pointed to the fact, right, the community members and also state authorities, typically blame victims of sexual violence in gun controlled territories. And so this kind of just reinforces the fact that, it's a form of selective violence because, it's not seen as indiscriminate. And so women actually are being blamed for the acts that they suffer. And so, at the end, you can still infuse fear, but you don't necessarily just blame the perpetrators, right? So you don't lower your support, like at least from the point of view of the organized criminal groups or in engaging in this type of violence. So the population don't necessarily is going to withdraw the support that they might have or not because of engagement in this type of violence, but actually women are being blamed. And so, the qualitative evidence documents state armed forces strategic motives for sexual harassing of women in gun control neighborhoods. And here is a quote. I'm not going to read it all, but for example, one of the respondents that I interviewed who actually is a human right defender that works in areas controlled by guns. So what she said is where more presence guns have, the police and the military have more justification to be present to humiliate you, including women. When they want to bother women, they tell them that they are the girlfriends of gang members. Consequently, they start harassing and abusing them, saying, if you belong to the gang, then you belong to everyone. That's the masculine logic that if you had sex with the gang, then you can have sex with anyone. That happens in those territories. Again, just showing how the idea of militarized masculinity is being used to terrify entire communities. And so in some, I do find support for my argument. Of course, this is still a work in progress. And again, I'm also interested in residents' reactions to these different forms of violence, and that's what I'm working on. But thank you so much, and I very much look forward to your questions and comments.